Hey, thanks for joining me today on the ClearBlade technical video series. My name's Allsbrook, and I'm excited today to show you bulk upload or batch update, whatever words you'd like to use for how you load lots of data into your systems. So we'll start by going to our typical place of ipm.clearblade.com. We'll run that search and we can see that we have a new IPM available to us called bulk upload. As typically the case, we can see there's a little bit of information about it, including instructions for setup, and we'll just go through that together. First step is to click copy on that URL, and now we'll bounce to our instance of our platform. Here we see we have a number of systems already in place. We certainly could import that IPM directly into one of these, but for the sake of this demonstration, we'll do it in a new system. So I'll just click install, I'll paste that upload, and we'll run the fetch. And now we can see that all the elements of that particular IPM system have been imported in, and we have a new system called bulk upload. If we dive in and look at the instructions, we'll see it's pretty simple. Two simple setup steps. The first is update the batch constants library. The next is to save and test this service called batch setup. So it's going to basically do some generic setup for us. So we'll go in and look at that library, batch constants. I'm using a platform on staging rather than the actual public sandbox, so I'll just update that URL and hit save. I'll go back and pick the batch setup. Here we can see this is going to create a user for us. I put the password here. Obviously you should change that in your real life for what you're trying to do, but in this case for the demonstration it certainly works. So we will save and test that. And now when that finishes, we'll look and we actually have no errors, and I can see that we have a particular uploader system here, or user. So that's all there is. If we go back and look at the bulk upload help, it'll tell us now simply open the batch uploader portal. So let's jump in and see that. I'll click the link. And we'll see what it's done is it's asked us to log in as that uploader account. Obviously batch uploading into your data and devices and users, that's kind of a powerful role, so we'll make sure that we protect it. And we'll click log in. Once you log in, you can see that we basically have a number of steps that we'll kind of scroll down through. One of the things we did in this IPM is we actually made it so it could do some deeper inspection and look at data about your collections and your schema. Idea being that as you might advance this, you want to validate the data types, or you might want to do your own custom mappings here in the user interface for this. For now, it's pretty straightforward. So I'll just use kind of my basic, and then we'll be able to see the collections that are there. So we'll log in, and essentially it's going to get a little developer credential, which now lets us pick from collections versus having to know their names, right? That's kind of an accelerated authority. That is the same credential you'll see up here in my actual account. So that's the developer account versus a user account. Now let's look at step 2. It's to choose a CSV file. If you look at that original URL, the GitHub URL, inside of there you'll notice I've created and added some default CSVs. These are CSVs you can use to test with. Obviously in your own collections where you have your own schemas, you'll want to do your own thing. That's kind of part of the setup you'll have to do for your own customization. But let's go ahead and prove out the collection load. So I'll look and I'll choose the collection CSV. We'll click open. It's done a local parsing, so it's pulled back the data and you can see what's there. This data will go very efficiently in one large batch chunk, so it'll be very, very quick. But just to prove there's nothing up the sleeve, if we look at this import collection, we can see it's fully empty. I'll come in, we'll select the import collection, the collection as the import type, and run it. So now it's fired and come back with all the new unique item IDs, kind of the PK that we'll generate for you here for all that data. And if we go look, we'll see there it all is loaded up. So a pretty powerful way to get lots of data in. Hundreds and hundreds of columns and thousands of pieces of information can all go up that way. Obviously the schemas match, so the header column or the header row in that CSV must match your structure of your collection. That will be true of both the user's device and device table. So let's look again. Let's try a different setup. Let's try users. So we'll run users here. Click that file. We've loaded it up, and we now can see we have A at A, B at B, C at C, right? So a whole new set of users coming in. You'll also notice when I switch to users, there's a question of where is the password going to come from? In this demo, we've created it so this backend service is actually going to generate very unique passwords for you. You could pump those in if you want. When I run this import, I'm going to ship those passwords back for the sake of the demonstration. I think there's a much more compelling use case if you were doing this in real life of a CSV import of users to actually email each one of those individual users their password and never expose that back out to you as the developer or me as the uploader. Because we certainly have the communication technique already with that email there. Take a look in IPM for a number of email integration solutions. So we've selected the file, we'll run import. You'll notice this runs a good bit slower. That is because the passwords that are going in are being heavily salted. Obviously, security is very, very important. The number one way you protect people from actually cracking those passwords is to do a recursive salting of all that information such that it can be difficult to generate and try to hack. So that's what's going on. That's why it took a little longer, but you can see all that data's come back. And if we go back and look at that users table, which once just had the uploader user, it now has all of those new users added and their custom data that each person needed to have. So a very fast way to get in connection and load up the system. We could have done SMS as well for that password. Kind of lots of interesting ways to look at it. The final thing we'll do is we'll go up and we'll select the device CSV file. So we'll choose that. We'll now notice that there's a number of other pieces in here. Name, state, description. Some of this is default stuff ClearBlade gives you, and then certainly it gets more specific like manufacturer or the type here that might be driven totally by you. The one column that is of interest is the enabled. If you think about when you're creating large batches of devices, perhaps you want to get the records in place, you want to get the data filled out, but you don't want that device to be turned on, so to speak, meaning that it can't turn on and begin streaming data. It's only kind of a device record. This enable flag handles that, so it's a built-in structure, goes in as true or false, meaning that as that device goes into the true state, that it can actually run, authenticate itself, do the whole authorization model. In this case, I'm showing both the false, the unprovisioned state, so to speak, and the true, it turned on the moment it starts. We'll select the devices column, or devices table, run import, and yet again, it's going out there and it's generating a number of keys. These are active keys, so that's the model it uses rather than cyclical keys or certificates. We've kicked all those back. You can imagine if we were doing manufacturing here, this is the kind of information we pump right back into the embedded firmware or whatever we wanted to do. So that model's in place here as well, and we'll go look at it. Finally, to see that we've dropped in these devices, their enabled states are here. All the information you would expect has been pumped in. Final thing before we wrap up is we'll look at this service that's been doing all this work. It's called batch util. I put all the logic in kind of one spot to keep it simple. Certainly gave you some test structures to try out. But when you look through here, you'll see cool things like essentially the process of are we going to load collections, load devices, load users, and then the actual pumping of each one of those things to create it via the APIs internally. Again, you have total control of all this. You can even go look at the functions like generate password and see if you want to change that. You can change the length of the password. All that information is there as for you to be updated. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned something and I hope this is helpful. Talk to you soon.